Hello students, welcome to the session 8 of Unit 2. In the last session, you learned about other approaches for analysis such as entity, relationship diagram, key concepts of ER diagram, importance and rules for ER diagram. In this session, you will learn about validation, introduction, common errors occur in SRS, requirement review, and goals of requirement review. Validation. The development of software starts with the requirements documents. It is important that the requirement contains no errors and specifies the client's requirements correctly. Validation is the process of checking whether software product is up to the mark or product has high level requirements. It is the process of checking the validation of product and compare actual and expected output. It is extremely desirable to detect errors in the requirements before the design and development of the software begins. In requirement specification phase, there can be misunderstanding and errors, and the requirement specification does not accurately represent the client's needs. Validation is the documented process of demonstrating a system or process meets a defined set of requirements. There are common set of validation documents used to provide the evidence. A validation project usually follows the process called as validation planning. The decision is made to validate the system. A project lead is identified and validation resources are identified. Requirement gathering. System requirements are identified. Requirements are documented in the appropriate specifications. Specification documents are reviewed and approved. Validation documents include user requirement specification, functional requirements, design specification. In validation process, a different type of test is used to check the requirement mentioned in the SRS, software requirement specification. These include completeness checks, consistency checks, validity checks, realism checks, ambiguity checks, and verifiability. The output of requirements validation, the list of problems and agreed on actions of detected problems. The list of problems indicate the problem detected during the process of requirement validation. The list of agreed action states the corrective action that should be taken to fix the detected problem. There are some common errors that occur in SRS. SRS is a document that describes what the software will do and how it will be expected to perform. It also describes the functionality of the product needs to fulfill all stakeholders. The common types of errors occur in SRS is of 4 types. Omission. It is a common error in the requirements. In this type of error, some user requirement is simply not included in the SRS. The omitted requirement is related to the behavior of the system, its performance, or any other facts. Inconsistency can be due to the incompatibility of the stated requirements with actual requirements of the client, which is the mismatch. Next is the error is the incorrect fact. Errors of this type occurs when some facts recorded in the SRS is not correct. Ambiguity means confusion. Errors of this type occur when there are some requirements that have multiple meanings, that is, their interpretation is not unique. And the common errors that occur in SRS. Some projects have collected data about the requirement errors. On average of total more than 250 errors were detected, and the percentage of different types of errors was omission 26%, incorrect fact 10%, inconsistency 38%, ambiguity 26%. In the errors detected in the requirements of specification of the A7 project is a real-time flight control software were reported. A total of 80 errors were detected, out of which 23% were clerical in nature, and the remaining distribution error type was omission 32%, incorrect fact 49%, inconsistency 13%, ambiguity 5%. The distribution of errors is different in these two cases. It reflects the difference in the application domain and the error detected methods. The major problems suggested are omission, incorrect fact, inconsistency, and ambiguity. To improve the quality of SRS itself, the validation should focus on exposing these types of errors. Requirement review, it is the one of the common method used in validation. As requirements are in the textual documents, it cannot be executed. So inspections and reviews are suitable for requirement validation. Inspection of SRS, it is also called as requirement reviews, or the most common method of validation. The requirement review team generally consists of clients as well as user representatives. A requirement review is also called as walkthrough. It is a meeting where it contains the requirement review team and stakeholders, and they check the requirement documentation page by page, line by line, to ensure that the document represents everyone's complete understanding of what is to be accomplished in this particular project. Requirement review is a review by group of people to find errors and point out the matter of concern in the requirement specification of a system. The review group should include the author of the requirements documents, someone who understands the need of the client, a person of the design team, and the persons responsible for maintaining the requirement document. It is also a good practice to include some people which are not directly involved with the product development, and they are software quality engineers. The primary goal of the review process is to reveal any errors in the requirements. The review process is also used to consider some factors that affects the quality such as testability and readability. During the review, one of the jobs of the reviewers is to reveal the requirements that are difficult to define the criteria for testing the requirement. For a successful requirement review, there are three main roles. They are the author. The author writes the requirements and responsible for the requirement until the end of the review process. The lead reviewer manages the review process and people involved. In addition, the lead reviewer acts as the main decision maker. And the last role is reviewer. The reviewer carries out the actual review of the author's requirements. A requirement review is a manual process that involves people from both client and contractor organizations. They check the requirements, documents for anomalies and omissions. Informal reviews simply involve the contractors discussing requirements with many system stakeholders as possible. In review, there are two types: informal review and formal review. In informal review, it is conducted on as needed, and the date and time of the agenda for the informal review will not be added in the project plan. and the developer chooses a review panel and provides and presents the material to be reviewed. The material may be as simple as handwritten or it is a computer listing. In formal review, it is conducted at the end of each life cycle project development plan. The agenda for the formal review should be addressed in the project plan. The materials will be well prepared. Examples for formal reviews are software requirement review, software preliminary design, and critical design. Requirement reviews are also called as inspections or the most effective methods used for the detecting requirement errors, or it is used for validation. The data in the A7 project shows that about 33% of the total errors detected were by the review processes, and about 45% of the requirement errors were detected during the design phase, when the requirement document is used as a reference for the design. Apart from the requirement review used for validation, there are some other methods that are used for validation. They are automated cross-referencing, reading, constructing scenarios, prototyping, and metrics. These are the other methods used for validation. There are some reviews and checklists for validation. Make sure that all team is participating in the software requirement specification document review, and read specification document carefully and discuss each and every point with the team members. The main part of SRS the main part of the SRS should cover about the functionality, and it should tell us about what is the software not supposed to do. So make sure that all functionality is properly covered. Review the requirement specification document carefully, and if observed terms is used which is in specification leads to ambiguities, then ask the stakeholders about the clarification. Then check the ambiguous terms used in SRS like usually, sometimes, some, mostly, etc. Check the terms used like lists but not clearly mentioned or fully mentioned. The list. Make sure the reviewer should clarify the full list. Check about what all attributes are considered in the SRS like correctiveness, portability, security, maintainability, etc. There are many benefits of a face-to-face review meeting. The discussion among the broader team to validate the clarity and accuracy requirements is likely to be the higher quality than individuals independently reviewing the requirements document. It ties the web of requirements together in everyone's minds, and they discuss the complete requirements in context. Stakeholders align around scope and confirm the requirements are clear enough that they all interpret them the same. They also gain an understanding of how the requirements affect them. Stakeholders who may not be knowledgeable about requirements gathering, authoring, and reviewing will be educated in the process. The requirement review is the common method used for requirement validation, and it is used to find the errors in the SRS, and there are some special tools used for modeling and analysis. These tools are used to check only the internal consistency and completeness, and it cannot directly check for the external completeness. There are some importance of review process. Productivity of development team is improved and timescales reduced because the correction of defects is made in early stages, and work products will help to ensure that those work products are clear and unambiguous. Testing costs and time is reduced as there is enough time spent during the initial phase. Reduction in cost because fewer defects in the final software, and there are some defects in the review. They are deviation from standards either internally defined or defined by regulatory or an organization, requirement defects, design defect, incorrect interface specifications. There are some steps for requirement review. They are documents go through the multiple revisions, so make sure that the right version of the referenced document is created. Establish the guidelines on what expected at the end of the review from each team member. Decide on what deliverable are expected from this step. Typically, the output of this step is to identify the test scenarios. Test scenarios are nothing but one-line pointers of what to test for certain functionality. Also establish guidelines on how this deliverable to be presented. Decide on whether each member of the team is going to work on the entire document or divide it among themselves. It is highly recommended that everyone reads everything because that will prevent knowledge concentration with certain team members. In a huge project, SRS will be of 1000 pages. So it is necessary to breaking the document module wise and assign to the individual team members. It is so practical. SRS review also helps in better understanding if there are any specific prerequisites required for the testing of the software. A list of queries where some functionality is difficult to understand or if more information needs to be incorporated into functional requirements or if mistakes are made in SRS are identified. Team members' inputs are very important for the success of the review. There are some checklists for requirement review of the document. Does each software requirement have an unique identifier? Is each software requirement verifiable? If possible, formalize quantity. If each requirement is prioritized. Are all unstable software requirements marked as such as TBC? It means to be confirmed. Are the software requirements complete? It means all user requirements are covered, all relevant input situations are accounted. Are the software requirement consistent? Which means it can be implementable. Is overlap among software requirements pointed out explicitly? That is redundancy, cross-reference. Is the initial system state clearly specified? Does the software requirement represents the logical model instead of implementation? Are the software requirements expressed in a structured way, that is in hierarchical levels? Are the software requirements are sufficiently formalized? Are the critical properties of the software requirements are proved? Have appropriate requirement documentation standards have been followed? Are all the figures, tables and diagrams labeled and referenced? All terms and units of measures defined? Do the requirements provide an adequate basis for design and test? Are the user characteristics defined? Does the specification includes all the needs and requirements of the clients and the users? Are the hardware and software requirements are specified? Any design or implementation constraints described? Are all safety and security requirements are properly specified? All external interfaces, software and hardware are clearly defined. Is each requirement written in consistent, clear, and concise language? Are there measurable acceptance criteria for non-functional and functional requirement? Is each requirement is traceable to its source? Is each requirement in scope of project? Have the human interfaces requirements been addressed? Are they correct? Have all data privacy requirements been included? Are all reliability, recoverability, and performance requirements properly specified? There are some requirement validation checklist. In that, there is validity check. The function proposed by stakeholders should be aligned with what the system needs to perform. Consistency checks. Requirements in the document should not conflict or different description of the same function. And completeness check. The document should include all the requirements and constraints. Validation is performed by involving the stakeholders, other requirement sources, as well as external reviewers if necessary. Validation ensures that its stakeholders will satisfy with the software requirement specification. Validation checks the SRS against the stakeholders' goals and requirements. Reviews are expensive because they involve a large group of people spending time reading and checking the document. Expense can be reduced by organizing the pre-review checking. One person checks the documents and looks straightforward to the problems such as missing requirements, lack of conformance to the standards, typographical errors, etc. Okay students, this is about the validation. So it is mainly used to find the errors in the software requirement specification. For validation, requirement review is used. It is also called as inspection. The review process goal is to find the errors in the document. Let us discuss about the multiple choice questions of this session. First question is, validation is an activity used to ensure that the SRS reflects the actual requirements accurately and clearly, to model the data in the system and how the data items related to each other. It views a system as a function that transforms the inputs into outputs in the partitioning process. And the solution is A. So you know that validation, it is used for finding errors in the SRS and to reflect the actual requirements accurately and clearly. And the option B, it represents the entity relationship diagram. And the third option is, and it is a definition for a data flow diagram. And the last one, it is a technique used in analysis. And the next question is, the best way to conduct a requirement validation review is to examine the system mode for errors, have the customer look over the requirements, send them to the design team and see if they have any concerns. Use a checklist of questions to examine each requirement. And the solution is D. So I told you that in the validation or requirement review, checklist is very important. It contains some of the questions. So the review team has to answer by verifying the SRS. Third question is, the common method used for validation is A. Requirement review, B. Verification, C. Requirement specification, D. Quality assurance. And the solution is A, requirement review. I told you that the common method for validation is requirement review, which contains a group of people for finding the errors. Verification is verifying the software or requirement. Requirement specification contains some of the details about the system. Quality assurance is used to check the quality of a product. So the solution is A, requirement review. And the next question is, omission is defined as a type of error. Some user requirement is simply not included in the SRS. Incompatibility of the stated requirements with the actual requirements of the client. A type occurs when some fact recorded in the SRS is not correct. A type occurs when there are some requirements that have multiple meanings, that is, their interpretation is not unique. And the solution is A. These are all the errors that occur in the SRS document. Omission means some of the requirements is not included in the SRS, but it may be required later by the document. So the solution is a type of error. Some user requirement is simply not included in the SRS. Fifth question is, the primary goal of the review process is to represent the behavioral requirements of a system, to develop high quality software, to reveal any errors in the requirements, to properly organize the requirement document. So I already told that the primary goal of the review process is to reveal any errors in the requirements. Hence the solution is C. And the next question is, an SRS provides a reference for validation of the final product. And the options are A, true, B, false. And the solution is true. S, SRS contains the reference. And the next question is, in validation, requirements can be checked against the following conditions: if they can be practically implemented, if there are any ambiguities, if they are completed, and D, all of the above. And the solution is D. The requirement, it will check all of these options. And the next question is, eighth one, the common type of error in an SRS are verifiable, correct, unambiguous, incorrect, fact. And the solution is D. Verifiable means an SRS is verifiable if and only if every stated requirement is verifiable. Correct. If every requirement included in the SRS represents something required in the final system. Unambiguous, if and only if every stated requirement has only one interpretation. And last one is incorrect fact, which is an error in the SRS which represents incorrect fact in the SRS. So the solution is D, and the remaining are the desirable characteristics of SRS. Next question is, requirement reviews are the most effective for detecting requirement errors, for problem analysis in software requirement, to partition the problem into sub-problem, to model the data in the system. I told you that, keep in mind, requirement review, it is used for detecting the requirement errors. Hence the solution is A. And the last question is, inconsistency is incompatibility of the stated requirements with the actual requirements of the client. A type occurs when some fact recorded in the SRS is not correct. A type of error, some user requirement is simply not included in the SRS. If there are any ambiguities. And the solution is A. It is also a common error in SRS which represents the incompatibility of the stated requirements with actual requirements of the client, which means there is a mismatch between the actual and the stated requirements. So to do this session, I referred a concise introduction to software engineering by Pankaj Jalote. This is the last session of Unit 2. I hope you all understood the concepts of this session. I would like to thank you sincerely to the team members who supported me and giving this opportunity. Thank you one and all.